In a significant development in U.S. trade policy, President Donald J. Trump announced an aggressive new tariff regime aimed at addressing what he describes as unfair trade practices that have contributed to large and persistent trade deficits. This sweeping measure, which involves imposing an initial 10% tariff on imports from most countries with even higher rates for select nations, has sparked widespread concern among global leaders and economists alike. On April 2, 2025, during a formal address from the White House, Trump declared a national emergency stemming from these trade deficits, which reached a staggering $1.2 trillion in 2024, a 40% increase over the past 5 years. The president attributed these deficits to a lack of reciprocity in trade relationships, citing disparate tariff rates and non-tariff barriers imposed by key trading partners that he argues suppress American wages and consumption while artificially bolstering the competitiveness of foreign goods. Large and persistent annual U.S. goods trade deficits have led to the hollowing out of our manufacturing base and undermined critical supply chains, Trump stated, emphasizing the need for corrective action to protect national security and economic interests. He outlined a historical context for U.S. trade policy, noting that reciprocity has been a guiding principle since the 1930s but has failed to materialize in recent decades, leading to significant imbalances. The new tariff policy will begin with a 10% ad valorem duty on all imports starting April 5, 2025. For specific trading partners identified in an annex to the executive order, tariffs will be higher, with rates tailored to reflect each country's trade practices. The White House has justified the tariff calculations based on the trade deficit each country has with the U.S., a methodology that some economists argue lacks a comprehensive economic rationale. As the news broke, global markets reacted sharply, with major stock indexes in the US and Europe experiencing significant declines. Investors expressed concerns over the potential for increased consumer prices and the impact on industries reliant on international supply chains. For instance, the automotive sector, which Trump has targeted for revitalization, is likely to face higher costs on imported parts and materials, further complicating the recovery of domestic manufacturing. Critics have noted that while these tariffs may reduce bilateral trade deficits, they could exacerbate the overall trade deficit, as the U.S. economy is fundamentally structured around high levels of consumption. Professor Jonathan Portes of King's College London remarked, "Yes, it will reduce bilateral trade deficits between the U.S. and these countries. But there will obviously be lots of broader impacts that are not captured in the calculation." The tariffs, he suggests, could lead to retaliatory measures from affected countries, potentially igniting a trade war that could have far-reaching consequences for the global economy. In response to the announcement, leaders from various nations have voiced their discontent. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney pledged to implement countermeasures against U.S. tariffs, asserting that the levies would negatively impact millions of Canadians. Similarly, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese criticized the tariffs as not the act of a friend, while indicating that his country would not retaliate. The European Union has also signaled intentions to respond with countermeasures, with its leaders emphasizing the need for unity in the face of U.S. protectionism. The ramifications of Trump's new tariff policy extend beyond immediate economic impacts. The potential for increased prices on everyday goods, from electronics to food products, poses a significant risk to American consumers. The administration's focus on reversing the decline in manufacturing jobs, which have plummeted by around 5 million since 1997, is commendable. However, many experts question whether tariffs are the most effective means to achieve this goal. As the global trading landscape becomes increasingly volatile, the future remains uncertain. The administration's willingness to impose such broad tariffs suggests a significant shift in U.S. trade strategy, one that prioritizes domestic manufacturing and national security over international cooperation. Observers are left wondering how long this new tariff regime will last and what its long-term implications will be for both the U.S. economy and its relationships with trading partners around the world. As Trump himself stated, the operation is over. the patient lived and is healing, leaving many to ponder whether the patient will indeed emerge stronger or if it will suffer from the very treatment intended to restore its health. In a dramatic escalation of trade tensions, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a sweeping set of reciprocal tariffs on over 180 countries during a press event in the White House Rose Garden on April 2, 2025. This bold move aims to address perceived unfair trade practices in currency manipulation by foreign nations, particularly targeting economies such as China, Mexico, and Canada. The newly imposed tariffs have sent shockwaves through global markets, particularly impacting the Asia-Pacific region. The Nikkei 225 in Japan suffered a significant decline, dropping over 3% as investors reacted to the implications of Trump's tariff policies. The tariffs, which will see a baseline rate of 10% apply to all imports unless specified otherwise, come on top of existing duties, resulting in a staggering effective tariff rate of 54% for Chinese imports. This has raised concerns among analysts who warn that such measures could hinder economic growth across the region. Chris Cushle's chief emerging markets macro strategist at T. Rowe Price remarked, "The fresh tariffs represent a significant increase in tariffs on Asian exports and arguably more than anticipated by the market." Moreover, Trump's rhetoric during the announcement emphasized a commitment to protecting American jobs in industries. "We will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us," he stated, suggesting that U.S. tariffs would reflect the perceived inequities in trade practices faced by American exporters. The Trump administration claims that these tariffs are a necessary response to the barriers other countries impose on U.S. goods, which include not just tariffs but also currency manipulation and non-monetary trade barriers. However, the reaction to Trump's announcement was immediate and severe in financial markets. The Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong fell sharply while other major Asian indices followed suit, reflecting a broad concern about the impact of escalating trade wars on global economic stability. Analysts from Macquarie Capital noted that the 26% tariffs on Indian exports in particular were much worse than expected, highlighting the potential for significant economic repercussions. In addition to the international fallout, Trump's tariffs have implications for domestic politics as well. The president is exerting pressure on Senate Republicans, particularly targeting those whose votes he deems uncertain, regarding a resolution aimed at curtailing his authority to impose tariffs on Canadian goods. Trump accused Senators Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Rand Paul of weakness, urging them to support his tariffs, and opposed the Democratic-led resolution. The stakes are high, as the resolution, if passed, could undermine Trump's aggressive trade policies. The ramifications of Trump's tariff strategy extend beyond immediate market reactions. Analysts predict that U.S. consumers could bear the brunt of higher prices, estimating that families might pay an additional $4,200 annually due to increased import costs. This potential inflationary pressure raises concerns about reduced consumer spending and overall economic growth in 2025. Tai Hui, the chief market strategist at J.P. Morgan Asset Management, warned that persistent tariffs could push U.S. average tariff rates to levels unseen since the early 20th century, further complicating the economic landscape. As global markets grapple with these developments, the trajectory of U.S.-China relations remains uncertain. Trump's administration anticipates that retaliatory measures from affected countries could follow, leading to a potential global trade war. Economists from Macquarie Capital estimate that the net tariff impact on China could shave off 2% to 2.5% from its GDP growth, a stark reminder of the interconnectedness of global trade. Looking ahead, the implications of these tariffs will likely unfold over the coming months as businesses and consumers adapt to a new economic reality. The potential for retaliatory tariffs and further escalations could reshape international trade dynamics, placing additional pressure on economies that rely heavily on exports. As markets respond to these shifting conditions, the focus will remain on how both domestic policy and international responses evolve in the face of Trump's aggressive trade strategy. In a dramatic move that could reshape the landscape of international trade, President Donald Trump announced sweeping new tariffs on April 2, 2025, during a Rose Garden event. These tariffs, described as reciprocal, include a staggering 34% tax on imports from China, a 20% tax on goods from the European Union, and varying rates for other nations such as Japan and Taiwan. This sweeping action, which Trump branded as part of his Liberation Day initiative, aims to bolster U.S. manufacturing and rectify what he termed decades of unfair trade practices that have left American workers at a disadvantage. The tariffs represent a significant escalation in Trump's ongoing trade war, targeting not only adversaries but also traditional allies, and come as a direct response to the trade surpluses these countries maintain with the United States. In his remarks, Trump painted a bleak picture of the global trade system, declaring our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered. He justified the tariffs as necessary to reclaim American economic sovereignty and expressed confidence that they would bring hundreds of billions of dollars into U.S. coffers. Despite the president's optimistic rhetoric, many economists and analysts warn of dire consequences. The new measures are expected to push inflation higher, particularly affecting consumer prices for essential goods such as housing, clothing, and automobiles. Scott Lincecum and Colin Grabow from the Cato Institute have noted the historical significance of these tariffs, likening them to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930, which is often cited as a catalyst for the Great Depression. They cautioned that such protectionist policies could trigger a global trade war with far-reaching implications for economic stability. Trump's administration has framed the tariffs as a response to an economic emergency, invoking the 1977 International Emergency Powers Act to bypass Congress. However, this unilateral approach has drawn criticism from various quarters, including members of Trump's own party. Republican senators, particularly those representing agricultural states, have expressed concerns that the tariffs could harm U.S. farmers and consumers alike. As House Speaker Mike Johnson remarked, while the long-term benefits may be promising, the initial fallout could be rocky. These tariffs are not isolated in their impact. They overlap with existing tariffs on steel and aluminum imports and come on the heels of previous levies on automotive imports. The administration has also hinted at future tariffs targeting pharmaceuticals, lumber, and technology products, indicating a broader strategy of economic protectionism. The international response has been swift and critical. Canada and the EU are preparing their countermeasures, with Canada already implementing retaliatory tariffs. European leaders have voiced their alarm, with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni labeling the tariffs wrong and urging for diplomatic negotiations to prevent a trade war. In a measured response, the Chinese government stated that protectionism leads nowhere, emphasizing that trade wars yield no winners, a sentiment echoed by many in the global economic community. As the tariffs begin to take effect, with the 10% baseline rate starting on April 6, the potential for escalating tensions looms large. Economists warn that prolonged high tariffs could lead to widespread recessions in affected countries, with Olu Sunola from Fitch Ratings predicting that the average U.S. tariff rate could surge to approximately 22% from a mere 2.5% in 2024. In the domestic arena, American companies are already feeling the pinch. Business leaders like Jay Foreman of Basic Fun revealed plans to raise prices significantly on popular toy products due to increased costs from tariffs. Foreman remarked that there is no other way, highlighting how the tariffs will directly affect consumers as companies pass on the costs. The unfolding situation raises critical questions about the future of U.S. trade policy and its implications for the global economy. As markets react and political discourse intensifies, all eyes will be on how these tariffs impact not only the U.S. economy but also international relations moving forward. The potential for a protracted trade conflict could redefine economic alliances and reshape the global trading landscape for years to come. In a move that has sent shockwaves through global markets and rattled economic confidence, President Donald Trump announced sweeping new tariffs on a wide array of goods from nearly all U.S. trading partners. Speaking from the Rose Garden on April 2, 2025, Trump unveiled plans for a 10% baseline tax on imports, escalating tariffs on countries with significant trade surpluses with the United States. Notably, imports from China are now subject to a staggering 34% tax, while goods from the European Union face a 20% levy. These tariffs, described by Trump as reciprocal, are part of a broader strategy aimed at bolstering U.S. manufacturing and addressing what he characterized as a historical pattern of economic exploitation by foreign nations. The announcement marks a pivotal shift in U.S. trade policy that could dismantle decades of cooperative economic frameworks established post-World War II. "Our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered," Trump asserted, framing the tariffs as necessary to restore fairness in international trade and reclaim economic sovereignty. With this declaration, the Trump administration is not only fulfilling a core campaign promise but also potentially setting the stage for a trade war that could have dire consequences for both domestic consumers and international relations. In the immediate aftermath, stock markets reacted negatively, with analysts warning of a potential economic slowdown as consumers brace for rising prices on essential goods. The tariffs are expected to impact a broad spectrum of products from electronics and automobiles to everyday consumer items, leading many economists to predict higher inflation rates. Scott Lincecum and Colin Grabow from the Cato Institute noted that the U.S. tariff levels are approaching those seen during the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930, which exacerbated the Great Depression. "We could see many countries end up in a recession," warned Olu Sanola, head of U.S. economic research at Fitch Ratings, as the average tariff rate is projected to surge from 2.5% to 22%. The implications extend beyond economic statistics; they touch the very fabric of American households. With consumer sentiment already waning, evidenced by a recent University of Michigan survey showing declines in public confidence and financial stability, many Americans are tightening their budgets. As Kathy Merkler, a laboratory coordinator from Florida, expressed, "I'm paying the same amount of money for fewer bags of groceries." The looming tariffs could inflate prices further, prompting consumers to curtail spending on non-essential items, which is critical as consumer expenditure drives the U.S. economy. Internationally, the reaction has been swift and varied. Canada and Mexico, longtime allies, are contemplating countermeasures, while the European Union has already indicated plans for retaliatory tariffs on American goods. The EU's Ursula von der Leyen stated that the global economy would massively suffer from such unilateral actions, reflecting a growing consensus among trading partners that Trump's approach may destabilize established economic relations. Meanwhile, countries like China have characterized the tariffs as unilateral bullying, pledging firm countermeasures to safeguard their economic interests. The potential for a trade war looms large, with smaller nations and developing economies particularly vulnerable to the repercussions of these tariffs. For instance, Cambodia faces a staggering 49% tariff on its exports to the U.S., which could jeopardize its economic prospects as it heavily relies on American consumers. This shift towards protectionism could not only disrupt supply chains but also catalyze a broader move away from dependence on the American market. As nations explore alternative economic partnerships. As Trump's administration moves forward with implementation, the question remains, how will these tariffs reshape the global economic landscape? While the president touts the potential for revitalizing American manufacturing and generating substantial new revenue, many analysts caution that such aims may be overshadowed by the immediate impacts on consumer prices and international relations. As the situation develops, American families and businesses alike will be closely monitoring the unfolding consequences of this historic policy shift, amid fears that the very economic recovery Trump seeks to bolster could be undermined by his own aggressive trade tactics. Future economic policy will likely pivot on how effectively the administration can navigate the complex interplay of domestic interests and international responses in this new era of tariffs, and a significant shakeup within the U.S. defense landscape. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has announced a plan to redirect approximately $50 billion from next year's defense budget. This substantial reallocation, amounting to 8% of the Pentagon's budget, aims to reorient funding away from what Hegseth describes as low-impact and low-priority Biden-era programs toward initiatives that align with President Donald Trump's America First agenda. The military is currently tasked with identifying programs for potential cuts, which include initiatives focused on climate change and diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI), as articulated in a statement by Acting Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert Salesses. The Pentagon's annual budget stands at $850 billion, the largest of any federal department, and the strategic shift is indicative of a broader ideological pivot under Hegseth's leadership. In his remarks, Hegseth asserted that the redirection of funds would refocus the Department of Defense on its core mission, deterring and winning wars. He emphasized that cuts would not compromise military capabilities, a point that is critical as the U.S. navigates complex global threats. Adding to the evolving defense narrative, Deputy Secretary of Defense Stephen Feinberg has launched a comprehensive review of existing regulations under a new initiative dubbed the Department of Government Efficiency (DOGE). This initiative, backed by Elon Musk, seeks to streamline federal regulations deemed unnecessary or burdensome. Feinberg's directive calls for DoD components to assess and potentially rescind regulations that hinder innovation and operational efficiency. This move aligns with Trump's broader deregulatory agenda and reflects an attempt to foster a more agile defense apparatus. Meanwhile, on the international stage, Greece has unveiled an ambitious €25 billion transformation of its defense strategy, marking what Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis characterized as the most drastic transformation in the history of the nation's armed forces. The strategy emphasizes the integration of advanced technologies and the involvement of the domestic defense industry, aiming to modernize Greece's military capabilities amid heightened tensions with Turkey and evolving geopolitical threats. Mitsotakis' remarks underscore a growing recognition among European leaders of the shifting security landscape as they grapple with the implications of U.S. foreign policy under Trump. The Prime Minister criticized Europe's historical reliance on American defense commitments, arguing that European nations must take more responsibility for their security. This sentiment resonates across NATO as member states face pressures to increase military spending in the wake of Russia's aggressive posture. In the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia is also navigating the complexities of defense partnerships, particularly as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman prepares for a pivotal meeting with President Trump. Amidst this backdrop, China has been expanding its defense offers to the kingdom, signaling a shift in the competitive dynamics between U.S. and Chinese defense industries. These developments reflect a broader trend of recalibrating defense strategies in response to both internal and external pressures. As nations reassess their military priorities and partnerships, the implications for global security and defense spending are profound. With Hegseth and Feinberg steering the Pentagon toward a more streamlined and focused approach, in countries like Greece and Saudi Arabia recalibrating their strategies. The coming months will be critical for understanding the future of defense in an increasingly multipolar world. The recent actions taken by the Trump administration to dismantle public diplomacy institutions that have been in place since World War II mark a significant shift in U.S. foreign policy. Established as part of a broader strategy to enhance America's global standing and foster international relationships, these institutions have played a crucial role in shaping diplomatic efforts during the Cold War and beyond. As Emily Fong reports for NPR, the current administration's withdrawal from these established frameworks threatens to undermine decades of progress in fostering mutual understanding and cooperation on the global stage. The implications of this dismantling are particularly pronounced in the context of the Middle East, where the absence of a coherent U.S. diplomatic strategy has left a void filled by more unilateral and aggressive stances. Joanne Mort, writing for The Guardian, emphasizes the alarming trend of abandoning diplomacy altogether, particularly regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Mort points out that the Trump administration has failed to propose realistic settlements, leaving leaders like Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unchallenged in their approach. This has sparked concerns that the lack of diplomatic engagement could lead to increased violence and instability in a region already fraught with tension. Moreover, the elimination of U.S. soft power initiatives such as USAID, which has historically provided financial support for democracy building and civil society in the region, exacerbates the situation. As Mort notes, these programs were designed to foster partnerships and promote equality, particularly between Jewish and Arab citizens in Israel and among Palestinians. Their abrupt cessation not only diminishes American influence but also curtails grassroots efforts aimed at peace and reconciliation. The departure of seasoned diplomats from the State Department further complicates matters. The recent retirement of Hans Wexel, a career diplomat overseeing Palestinian affairs, reflects a troubling trend within the Foreign Service. As Mort highlights, the loss of experienced personnel opens the door for ideologically driven figures who may lack the nuanced understanding necessary for effective diplomacy. The incoming U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, embodies this shift. His strong support for Israeli settlements raises concerns about a tilt away from the traditionally balanced U.S. approach. As tensions flare, Trump's aggressive rhetoric towards Iran, accompanied by the imposition of tariffs, suggests a foreign policy strategy that prioritizes confrontation over collaboration. This posture could have dire consequences. As Mort warns, potentially escalating conflicts that threaten the safety of both Israelis and Palestinians. A recent poll indicates that the Israeli populace is growing weary of the ongoing conflict, with a significant majority expressing a desire for a ceasefire. However, the current U.S. administration appears to be ignoring these sentiments, relying instead on a narrow circle of advisors who share a singular vision of maintaining power rather than pursuing peace. The ramifications of these foreign policy decisions extend beyond immediate diplomatic relationships. They risk alienating allies and destabilizing regions reliant on U.S. support. The interconnectedness of global diplomacy means that the choices made today will have lasting effects on international relations and the ability to address complex challenges. As the Trump administration continues to reshape U.S. foreign policy, the international community watches closely. The dismantling of established diplomatic frameworks, coupled with aggressive approaches in key regions, raises pressing questions about America's role in global leadership. Moving forward, the potential for renewed dialogue and cooperation hinges on the recognition of the importance of diplomacy in achieving lasting peace and stability. The coming months will be critical in determining whether the U.S. can realign its foreign policy to embrace a more collaborative approach, or if it will continue down a path of isolation and confrontation.